acquisition of land. Parallel to his renewable energy, environmental, and real estate practices, Miguel has worked with colleagues to develop a full-fledged Blackwell cryptocurrency and blockchain practice group team to serve the various legal needs of blockchain clients. And he has a strong interest in Bitcoin's potential to make existing energy grids more efficient and resilient. He's also done extensive writing on the intersection of Bitcoin and energy regulatory law. And he is a member of the Bitcoin mining subcommittee of the Texas Blockchain Council, and he works with ERCOT's Large Flexible Load Task Force. Miguel received his JD from the University of New Mexico School of Law and is admitted to practice in New Mexico and in Texas. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you, Jen, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, and based upon the applause, Jen, God, I can tell you were as big a fan of Jen as I am. Jen keeps the trains on time and keeps our life sane at the firm, so we're grateful to have her, and I'm grateful to be here with you all today. Thank you all for taking an interest in this presentation. I should say, given my energy and environmental background, it's a bit odd to find myself suddenly enmeshed in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Bitcoin was something that I really got into back in 2017. Started reading about it in 2016 and just didn't understand it. And the more I read, the more confused I got. And I finally found somebody else who was kind of like-minded. And I like to say that everybody comes to Bitcoin for their own reason, and there's a lot to it. But my reason, I'll be first and foremost to say, is I wanted to find a way to make my money grow, find the best investment, the next big investment. And as I learned more about it, I realized this potential to really transform finance and banking and cross-country border payments and a litany of other things that just kind of went down a rabbit hole. And it was something that was an escape for me. I'd read about Bitcoin at night and talk to my wife about it, and she'd tell me to shut up because she didn't care. And all of a sudden, because of the energy use that Bitcoin mining needs, I kind of found it smack dab hitting me where my actual profession was. So it wasn't really an escape anymore. It became kind of a component of the job. But I still like to start when I give talks about Bitcoin with just kind of first principles, because I realize that Bitcoin is still very new to a lot of people, and I think that's good. I think the more you educate yourself about the subject, the more you'll be intrigued by it, if that's what you like to do. But I also think there's going to come a point in the near future where you don't need to worry about why Bitcoin works and what it does. It's just going to be integrated into your everyday financial life and other components of your life, just like much of the internet has done over the last 25 to 30 years. So, full disclosure, these views are not the views of Hush Blackwell. I'm an attorney for Hush Blackwell, but my views are my own, and my thoughts are based upon my experience. And I want to make this interactive. I want to make sure that you all have the chance to answer questions, or to ask questions, because this is a new and strange sphere that we're all learning about. There are no real laws that regulate cryptocurrency or Bitcoin right now. The ones that impact it are existing laws that we're trying to force Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrency into. And some states are taking steps to actually develop a regulatory framework. I'm on the front lines of trying to navigate that for my clients and to figure out how to develop a blockchain practice around it. But everything's still very much a moving target. So I think keep that in mind. Feel free to ask questions. I'll do my best to answer. I'm not sure that I will have all the answers, but we'll do our best and learn as we go along. So I think it's really essential before you start worrying about what cryptocurrency is to ask yourself, what is money? And we've, especially in the US, have never really thought about that, because we just have a dollar, we use it to pay for our food and everything else. But money has taken different forms over time. It used to be salt, it used to be seashells, it evolved into gold. It's been whatever a broad group of people have accepted it is and are willing to accept it in exchange for something else. But money essentially has three main properties. It's a unit of account, it's a medium of exchange, and it's a store of value. And I think over the last millennia or so, gold has probably served that serve that, better than most other things, although gold is scarce. Gold increases in supply globally at about 2.5% every year. And so that's what gives it its durability, its value. Basically how much there's going to be, and since it's a finite resource, it tends to either maintain or go up in value over time. But basically the idea is you want to make sure that your dollar, your bar of gold or whatever keeps its value, but as a medium of exchange, the dollar is the best in the business right now, because you can't go to CVS and use your bar of gold to buy whatever, a toothbrush or whatever you might need. You have to convert it to dollars. And so Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, is an alternative, because it essentially, over the 13, 14 years that it has existed, has been gold better than gold has been. Now, you can make the argument that as a store of value, when it goes from $70,000 to currently $20,000, that's not really maintaining its value over time. But if you zoom out, when it started at fractions of a cent and now it's at $20,000, you can make the argument, and actually you can verify that it's the best performing asset in history, despite its broad fluctuations. So Bitcoin is decentralized, meaning that to send value from A to B, from me to you, you don't need a third-party bank, you don't need a PayPal, you don't need a Venmo. All those third-party apps that you use to pay people various ways, those are still tied to a bank, centralized organization in some way. With Bitcoin, you have an app, an internet connection, a phone, and as long as you have your keys that give you access to that Bitcoin, you can send that value anywhere on the planet through time and space instantaneously. A lot of people don't realize that when you send money, a bank wire, or if you have to send large amounts of money from, I don't know, the US to, an Eastern European country to buy steel, it goes through about, 3 to 7 different layers of bank transactions, and it can take anywhere from, 7 to 14 days to finally settle, meaning that the value that you sent to that place is actually received in the other place. With Bitcoin, that is instantaneous. And so where you see real potential for that is, let's just say, remittances to other countries. We have a lot of people that work in the US that have family in South America or wherever. And before Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, they used Western Union. And that was a great innovation. It's the best way you can find to get that value somewhere. But now, instead of your family in another country going to Western Union, walking up there and getting the value, potentially being robbed by people working outside of the Western Union, if they have a phone and you have a phone, and you have your keys and they have their public key, which I'll get into later, you can send that value from your couch and they can receive it on their couch without the fees that Western Union charges, which is typically between 10 and 25% of the overall transaction. And if you're working for $10 an hour or whatever, that can be a big chunk of the total value you're trying to transmit. And so Bitcoin, you can do that for fractions of a penny, or what's called a Satoshi, which is the smallest unit that Bitcoin can be broken down into. Bitcoin is divisible to the 8th decimal. So that means there's 21 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin. So this is something where you can divide it, almost infinitely. Now, where did Bitcoin come from? The truth is we do not yet know, and I hope, my personal view is I hope we never know. It was invented by a pseudonymous individual named Satoshi Nakamoto. And in the first block of Bitcoin that was ever mined, he basically said that he created it in response to the financial crisis. Now, this is a person or a group of people who were very skilled in math and computer science and cryptography, really a whole host of disciplines that were able to come together to form Bitcoin as we know it. And there's been lots of competing cryptocurrencies, copycat cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin as the first market mover, and now with a value of close to $1 trillion globally, is the behemoth in the space. And one of Satoshi's goals was to bank the unbanked. There's about 3 or 4 billion people on the planet that don't have access to the traditional financial system. And we take that for granted because when we're inconvenienced by a bank, it means because it's Sunday and we need a cashier's check and we need to wait until Monday. Many parts of the world, that is not the case. They just do not have access. And Bitcoin is the most rapidly growing technology in the history of humanity because the rails for it to prosper and promulgate are there. That's a phone and an internet connection. That is all you need to get your Bitcoin from wherever. And people in Africa use satellites and have cell phones, and they trade on Venmo or wherever. And now they're using Bitcoin, especially in lots of other countries. So they're using this technology in ways that we don't need to in the US or in the West, because we have a very highly functioning financial system. But that financial system is predicated on fees, overdraft fees, transmission fees, all kinds of other fees. That's what props that entire system up, and people make billions and trillions of dollars off of it. And they see Bitcoin as a threat to that existence because it's decentralized. You can move the value you normally would with a traditional financial system and have it at a fraction of the fees. So that is kind of the technological evolution and innovation that to many threatens the current financial system. I don't agree with that. I think they can coexist. I think they will coexist, but that is kind of, just to paint the picture for you.
Miguel, so do you see that as being sort of a global, as opposed to like the dollar is the US and the pound is the UK? So then Bitcoin would be more like a global currency that would be analogous to those.
Yes, I think Bitcoin is absolutely a global currency, and you're seeing that because you can convert it already from one currency to another, and that's a little more challenging now and not as widely used. But for example, there's something called the Lightning Network, which is Bitcoin is a layer 1 blockchain. Layer 2 blockchains are on top of the layer 1 because Bitcoin is software, so you can program on it, and that's where the innovation is. You can build things on it and all the other cryptocurrencies. So over time, as programmers become trained and start to experiment and innovate on the Bitcoin blockchain, on the Ethereum blockchain, building apps and other applications, you really integrate the exchange of information with the exchange of money. So that's why they call Bitcoin the native currency of the internet, because for the first time you can send value, through cyberspace without a third party. And I think, if you look at global events, the US just completely rug pulled Russia by cutting off, their use of the dollar and everything else. Russia's going to take that lesson pretty seriously. And if you think they're going to hold more dollars in the future versus less, that would be a shock to me. But essentially you get to use that trick once. And what other countries are going to notice is, hey, if we, make the US mad and we want to use dollars and they don't let us, that's going to be a competitive disadvantage. And, that's going to have implications. So what are they going to use? China's banned Bitcoin. They haven't really, but they have, verbally. The thing is, you can't ban Bitcoin. It's literally impossible. If one country bans it, if one state bans it, like New York in terms of mining, which I'll get to, it's still going to prosper elsewhere. And since it's native to the internet, you can only do so much to limit its use and spread. But yes, to directly answer your question, I think it has the potential to be the backbone of the overall global financial system, not so much in competition with the US dollar, but as another tool that we use to conduct finance globally. And you're seeing that because there's already, as I mentioned, the Lightning Network. And so if I want to send really small amounts of money, $5 to Japan, I can send my $5 using the Lightning Network, which is just an app. It converts to Bitcoin in transit, but the recipient in Japan gets yen. So these things are already available. They're just not widely used and adopted. But Bitcoin is what allows all those exchanges to be made in real time. This slide just kind of says, the adoption, 130 million to 1 billion, 7.5 years for the cell phone. Bitcoin took 4 years to reach that, and it's only taking off. And right now I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there's a huge downturn, and that happens in crypto. It happened in 2018, and I thought I lost all my money, and my wife, said I was a bonehead and everything else. But then it shoots up to 70 grand, and all of a sudden, you're a genius, and then it goes back down to 20, and you're a bonehead again. That's just the nature of an emerging technology. Amazon had a 90% tanking in the early 2000s, and look where it is now. So it's all about adoption. It's all about learning. It's about implementing regulations to keep people safe, because people certainly are getting burned in crypto. Not so much, I don't think, in Bitcoin, but because it is software, because it is programmable, because there's people that are using it to trade and doing all kinds of other things, there's going to be ups and downs. Ooh, this is a little bit blurry. I'm going to skip over some of these slides, but you'll be able to see just kind of how the transaction works.
We're going to email them out.
Right. So I won't get into details because I think I largely covered it. This is just more of a visual. So the point I like to make is that in the past, what you wanted was a centralized store of value. You wanted a Fort Knox. You wanted a place where your value was secure. Today, with the internet so widespread, you want it to be distributed. And I don't actually like to use Bitcoin and the blockchain ledgers. This is an example of this. I actually like to use information. So there's a cryptocurrency out there called Filecoin. And basically, if you download the software onto your computer, you can essentially do what Microsoft does. It stores your files, right? Well, but with Microsoft, it has a server. Well, a server is still a single point of failure, which is why Microsoft has servers and redundancies all over the globe where they back up your information and they can recover it if it's ever lost or hacked or whatever. Filecoin runs on individual computers, but each individual computer only has a little piece of the aggregate information. But if you get enough computers running the little pieces of that information, you can aggregate it and recover all the information. So they're using the existing network locally to where the local person can't ever access that information. But if you get enough of those computers together to put it all together, everything you have is recoverable and your storage, is distributed. So that's what Web3 is. And you think about that through money or any number of things, but that's not the future, that's the present. The future is just widespread adoption of that, because you can't put that genie back in the bottle once you see the efficiencies that it brings to everyday life. So just some broad potential benefits. It's frictionless, it's instant. I can do a demonstration with Jen on sending a Bitcoin transaction later. It's portable. So an example I like to give is Afghanistan. If the Taliban had come into your town and taken over your bank, and all of your value was there, what are your choices? If your house and your bulk of your value is tied in Afghanistan, not a lot you can do to take that with you if you're trying to flee the country. Well, if you have Bitcoin, you actually don't even need a cell phone or internet connection to take it with you. All you need is your seed phrase, which is a 21-word phrase that ties to a 256 character code that gives you access to your money. So you can literally remember your code and take your value with you, and there's not anything anybody can do to take that from you, find it on you, anything like that. So that's kind of the power of this technology. I keep mine not just written down, but written on steel plates that I have, distributed places. So you can take it to extremes, but to me, it's not really extreme. It's just taking control of how you keep and store your wealth outside of a banking system. It's secure, it's private. A lot of people like to say that Bitcoin is used for crime, and that's true. There are a fair amount of criminals that use Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but it still pales in comparison to the amount of people that use the US dollar in the form of cash to commit crime. So I think it's all a matter of perspective. You can trade anything for illicit purposes. That's just one use that Bitcoin has been utilized for. But you can say that about any emerging new technology. The automobile initially was used by criminals to outrun the cops because the cops were still on horses. The experience with the automobile for the early adopters was kind of miserable because they were running those cars on streets that were meant for horses and carts and buggies. But once we figured out that with a car, we just need a flat road, not a grooved road, that riding experience became much better. And that led to more and more mass adoption and everything else. And I think that's what you're seeing with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency now, when NASDAQ says that they're going to offer services to store value, to store Bitcoin for institutional clients. It's out of the bag. When JP Morgan goes from, oh, this is a scam, and 3 years later to say, oh, due to demand from our institutional clients, we're going to start offering the services. It's coming, and it's eventually going to come to the people like us who are not institutional investors. But you know, I think the lion's share of kind of the early value is going to go to those people, the early adopters, and it is still early, so it's not too late to, you know, get some exposure to it. This is not investment advice, just pointing out that, you know, they're still building the roads for this new technology in real time.
I have a question. How does it transfer upon death? Like, does your wife know your password, or like what? It's not, you can't do like payroll on death like a bank account, can you?
See, and that is what all us lawyers are trying to figure out.
Well, I'm in estate planning probate, so.
Right, so, you know, it is a big component of estate planning. And so there's services popping up like Unchained Capital. And what they use are multi-signature wallets, meaning you, your husband, and your best friend, your lawyer, whoever, can all have one key to your set of private keys. And that means two of you need to get together in order to access any of it. And you keep that in a secure location. And so if you get hit by a bus, your husband, you know, can't access your Bitcoin, that's a real issue. And so
Right.
it's going to be a big piece of estate planning. It already is. We have clients asking about it. We're already working on it and thinking about it. But yes, that is absolutely going to be a part of everybody's estate planning now and going forward.
Let's talk about family law. So family law, husbands and wives alike like to hide assets from each other.
Mhm.
So when we're developing discovery and trying to be all clever with trying to get this information, let's not have it. So how do you compel them to give it? I mean, if it's not listed somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a challenge, and I don't think there's a clear answer. I think the reality is that most people, I don't want to go too far afield here, but there's things called what they call virgin coins, and those are coins that have never touched an actual exchange. Those are really hard to get, and to get them, you'd have to set up your own mining rig, and you'd have to have your own server and your own computer, and those keys don't have any trace other than on the blockchain. If you buy your Bitcoin off of a Coinbase or a Binance or any of these exchanges, there's going to be a record of it, and you can trace it, and you can do it in real time if you know what you're doing. It's called a block explorer, and you enter in the code where that coin came from, and you'll be able to trace it and follow it. And that's what law enforcement is finding, that Bitcoin is really not that anonymous. Once you have programs that are sophisticated enough, you can trace the transaction. You might not know who's getting them, but the blockchain is open and it's auditable in real time, 24/7. So it never leaves the blockchain. If I give you $5, it just says on the chain that $5 left my wallet and went to your wallet. You might not know who we are, but you know where the transaction is. And then if you want to spend $1 over the 5, you can trace it, so on and so forth. But that also means you can retrace it back. So that's why criminals that steal large amounts of Bitcoin, especially in the West, they found, you know, eventually I'm gonna have to use this value somewhere, whether I convert it to cash, whatever it might be. And so to your question, it's hard, but it's going to get easier. And, you know, I think I know there's already services that do that, but where we are right now in the stage of the evolution of the space, yeah, it's certainly a concern. I think it'd certainly be easy to hide. This is not.
Without clicking. Working.
So Bitcoin's one cryptocurrency, how many competitors do they have?
Yeah, last I checked, there were over 20,000.
Oh, wow.
I think it's important, in my personal opinion. I tend to stick with Bitcoin and Ethereum. There's a lot of coins that do a lot of really cool things. They might have their purpose, but for the most part,
Working again.
yes, it's working again. For the most part, those other projects, you know, they're kind of like venture capital startup funds. Maybe they'll have a use, maybe they won't. I bought a bunch of those coins back in 2017, and I think 98% of them went to nothing. Now, small dollars here, but you know, that's just the reality. So I think to be safe, you kind of stick with the layer one chain, the Bitcoins, the Ethereums, the ones that have a track record, just like you do anything else, because to me, everything else really is just gambling. I won't get into this, but if you have questions, one thing to note that I'll get into, because this ties right into the energy use, is proof of work versus proof of stake. Now, Bitcoin uses proof of work. just like gold. You know that somebody had to use shovels and use fossil fuels and go dig it out of the ground. You know that somebody had to expend resources to get that value. Proof of stake is, both are called what's called consensus mechanisms, meaning that it's a means of agreeing as a network what the valid transactions on the blockchain are. So proof of work means that you mine the Bitcoin to add the next block to the chain, and you aggregate the transactions, mine $5 to Jen or $5 to wherever. The network recognizes that and they authenticate it with their computers, and then you keep adding to the chain. Proof of stake is where you commit capital to the blockchain, and we'll use Ethereum here. Let me see it. Okay, I'll stop there. So proof of stake is where you commit value to the blockchain to be what's called a validator on Ethereum. You have to commit 32 Ethereum to authenticate all the transactions on the blockchain. 32 Ethereum is, you know, close to $40,000. So you put real skin in the game to get that, and in exchange you're rewarded. You get about 5% return on your validating capacity. Now, if you're really tech savvy and you run your node on your computer as an Ethereum validator, and you decide to cause mischief, and you see somebody else with a side chain to Ethereum, which I will not get into because that's too far afield, and you decide to authenticate that side chain, the network knows what you're doing, and if you've been a valid Ethereum authenticator before and you're not now, they can do what's called slashing you. So they'll take away a portion or all of your Ethereum that you've staked. And that's how they keep the network secure, because people are agreeing on every transaction in real time that's on the network, and there's penalties for not doing it. Bitcoin mining, we'll go back to Bitcoin now. Bitcoin uses proof of work, and that requires mining. And when I got started, you could actually mine this on your laptop. You could have your little program running, and once a week or once a month, you'd come and say, hey, I got a Bitcoin, and oh, Bitcoin's worth $1,000, and then you'd come back 2 hours later and say, oh, it's worth $400. But you could actually run that on your personal laptop. Well, the way the network works is the algorithm adjusts every 2 weeks, and it adjusts based on the number of machines that are trying to, people say that are trying to solve complicated math problems. That's not what it's doing. These machines are trying to guess a specific 256-digit string of numbers, and that will give you access to the keys to access one block of Bitcoin. One block of Bitcoin right now is 6.25 Bitcoin, and it has every 4 years. And that's why Bitcoin is, it's a deflationary currency, meaning you can't make more of it. Less will be released. It will actually take 40 years to mine the last Bitcoin, because of the halving process. So you create scarcity that no government can interfere with. And actually, I don't have my notes, so I'm going from memory from some prior slides, so I'm skipping around a little bit. My notes were on the slides, but that's okay. No, that's all right. So one important thing is currency debasement. The Romans, the Greeks, a lot of people debased their citizens' currency. And so there was a time where you had just pure silver coins, and that had value. It had a certain, value that you could use to buy your goods. And then because that's a limited resource, government started asking people, hey, we need to gather your coins. They'd shave off the edges, which is why a lot of coins have the little slits of them, so you can tell if it actually has the amount. And they get those slivers and they make new coins, or criminals would do that. And so over time, what that led to was just the creation of a lot more coins with a lot less silver or gold in them. And that's still happening today. And we don't realize it because our dollar is still worth 100 pennies. But when you have, trillions of dollars being printed in the financial crisis, and El Salvador was the key country that got really nailed by that. They adopted the US dollar as their currency because they couldn't maintain their currency globally. To transact business. They adopted the dollar in 2001, and then we print all this money. So there's so many more dollars chasing scarce resources, land, property, whatever. And we still have 100 pennies, but everything we buy it with goes up in value. That is also debasement of currency. And so Bitcoin is designed to fight that. You can insert unlimited value into it. but nobody can ever make more of it. And so over time, you know, your dollar, your value, your store of value should go up in value over time. And that's where you get mining, because the mining, the more machines that come online, the harder it is to get that 256 character code. And that's why mining is so difficult. You have to expend resources, which is why they call it proof of work. Somebody, whether it was on your laptop, has to buy that electricity, pay for it through your utility, or now that it's more commercial, you have hundreds of miners in, you know, large rooms that are cooled and air conditioned. They are using their value to mine that coin with the hope of getting that reward. Yes, sir.
Why is mining so energy intensive?
So I will get to that shortly, because that's kind of really the thrust of my presentation. But the reason why is because you need specialized machines now, because so many people are competing for this value. So more and more people are getting their electricity, they're paying for it, hoping that they guess the 256 characters that will give them one block of Bitcoin, 6.25, which in today's dollars is, you know, almost $200,000. But when it was at $60, $70 a Bitcoin, you know, it was almost 3 times, so it was over 3 times that. So there's a lot of reward. When Bitcoin price is that high, it costs about anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 in electricity costs and staff to get it set up to mine the Bitcoin. Your profits are pretty big, but you know, the crashes are pretty hard. And so if you don't save that value, converting it to something more stable, then you're going to ride the market down quickly. And you're seeing that a lot right now, because a lot of miners are going bankrupt and you're having industry consolidation. And you know, I think it's only going to be a game for bigger and bigger players going forward, even though the currency, in my opinion, is going to be able to be used by the everyday person more easily than USD. So I already talked about that. The next halving, just so you know, it's set for around June 2024. And you can tell that based upon the difficulty adjustment. And that's where it goes from 6.25 Bitcoin to 3.12 Bitcoin that you'll get for mining a block. So the real gamble is that because it is a finite resource and it's going to be more broadly adopted, that your 3.12 BTC that you get in 2024 will be worth a lot more than it is now. And that's why all these miners want to get set up to get it, hoping that Bitcoin gets to $100,000 plus. You know, there's models out there that say that, you know, in 30 years, one Bitcoin will be worth $1 million plus. So who knows? It could completely fail. There could be a new blockchain that takes over. Right now, I think Bitcoin's still the first market mover, but that is kind of the way the industry is thinking about the price and the capex to actually mine the Bitcoin. In the US, Georgia and Texas lead the way, believe it or not. Georgia has more Bitcoin mining operations and hash power or machines trying to guess the 256 characters than Texas. Bitcoin miners, and this is important, they want the cheapest power that they can, because that is about 70% of their total cost of doing business. So they want the cheapest power, and right now the cheapest power there is wind and solar, or stranded natural gas from oil wells that nobody can use, and they just burn off the methane into CO2. And that's a loss to the taxpayer, because the taxpayers don't get the tax revenue from the royalties from that natural gas. Bitcoin miners are coming in and using that to mine Bitcoin and creating value by having the actual currency. It is environmentally and mentally intensive. New York has banned all new proof of work mining that doesn't use renewables, but it's still getting more mainstream adoption, as I mentioned. So, you know, despite the downturn, you'll have the strongest players still emerge, and they'll have gobbled up the weaker players that went bankrupt, and you'll see another bull market in this industry, just like you do many other industries. One thing before I get to the energy portion of the presentation that you all should know is that most energy, a lot of energy that we use every day is wasted. Now, why is that? It's because when you walk into your house and turn on a light, that light has to turn on. That is the utility's entire job, to make sure that when you want power, you have it when you need it. And they have sophisticated models where they know more or less, you know, people are going to be at this restaurant, they're going to need this. The steel plant's going to be operating, you know, now they're going to need this much power. But they always have to overproduce the base load power in order order to make sure that we all have the power we want when we need it. And that means that there has to be more power produced than is actually needed, meaning that power is wasted. Now, Bitcoin can come in there and say you have a huge natural gas fire or coal plant, wherever it may be, and it's just waiting for Jerry Jones to fire up his video games at Cowboy Stadium or whatever. He is something that needs a huge amount of unexpected power. Bitcoin can be buying that power at 2 to 3 cents. That's just being wasted, waiting for a big demand to come online suddenly. And so that's why Bitcoin is moving to West Texas, where there's wind and there's solar, and they're just trying to find the cheap power. And that's important when I get to the grid reliability part of this presentation. Now, if you look at the value of Bitcoin based upon what it costs to actually produce it, the value of the output is 100 times the cost of energy input. Now, how do we know that? Because we know more or less, we can click on a website and see how much power is being used by the Bitcoin network. So Bitcoin's energy use is transparent. What other industry can you say that about? Can you say that about steel? No, because they're being powered by other utilities. They're across the country. They're global. They're using coal. They're using all kinds of other efficiencies or lack thereof. So it's really hard to see into specific industries how much energy they're actually using. That's not really the case with Bitcoin, especially in the US, because we know, based upon our utilities, exactly how much is being used. But again, this is a global currency and a glowing function. Airlines, how much energy are the planes using sitting idle on the tarmac or running tests? How much power does the US military use in training exercises and everything else? We don't really know. We know it's a lot, but we can't really measure it the same way we can Bitcoin's energy use. I already covered this. One of the things I forgot to mention about proof of work was the security element. Early in Bitcoin's adoption, if you could seize 51% energy, that's next to impossible. They've done calculations where it would take a coordinated nation state attack to capture as much power with as much machines to execute a 51% attack to actually hack the Bitcoin network. So the energy use, now that it's gotten so big, that's a feature, not a bug. That means your value is literally backed by energy. I like to say it's the conversion of your value to energy. It's really storing value through energy. And that gives the user the security to know that as long as you keep your private keys, that network will always be there, will always be secure. It's global, so no government can ever hack it or debase it. So I think, if you look at it through that lens, it becomes different. With Ethereum proof of stake, it also has security that I mentioned, but what's to keep somebody, an Elon Musk and, Bill Gates from, slowly over time buying larger and larger amounts of the Ethereum network and then voting because they have the most Ethereum to change the network? That's actually possible with Ethereum. So that security component of it is, in my opinion, not as secure as Bitcoin's. With a Bitcoin, whether you own 100,000 Bitcoin or 1 Bitcoin, you have no more influence over the total network as anybody else. So that's why I think it's more secure for people over the long term to protect and store their value. Now, Ethereum did switch from proof of work to proof of stake, and that causes energy use to go down 99%. And especially in the West, where the narrative is, oh, we got to, cut our energy use, global warming, so on and so forth. That's a big narrative. And so you're seeing the big banks and the institutions want to buy Ethereum because they view it as more environmentally ESG friendly. And I think there's some use to that. There's some truth to that. You always hear people say Bitcoin uses as much power as some countries. Okay, well, that's true. Switzerland, but how big is Switzerland? How many people? What do they actually make in terms of industry? And then you also have to say compared to what? Before I get compared to what, I think it's important to know a little bit more about how we get our electricity. So basically, whether it's natural gas, coal, renewables, whatever it might be, there's some generator somewhere. that makes the electricity. It goes into our transmission lines. It's either bumped up or bumped down, depending on how far it needs to go. There's loss in transit. It's like 5 to 7%. And eventually it gets to a feeder. It goes to a smaller line. They take it down so that we can use it, and for smaller scale electrical uses like this. But somewhere there is energy expended to generate that electricity, and it's sent to all of us. Critical features of the grid: large users of electricity, like steel plants. If Winter Storm Uri, we all just went through that. They can ask certain large users of electricity to power down for a short amount of time. And that frees up electricity for other uses like hospitals and more critical things. But the steel plants can only do that for 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours, I think max, because then their operation starts to literally harden. So there aren't that many large users that can power down like that for an extended period of time to free up resources that are more critical in times of crisis. Now, Bitcoin is the opposite of that. It's a huge user of electricity, and it can power down at any time for an unlimited period of time. Now, if you're not mining, you're not profiting, but they do have programs out there, and one Bitcoin miner took advantage, and that's available to all large consumers of electricity. If you power down, they'll pay you not to use it, because then you free up the resources. You're providing a service to the grid, a resiliency to the grid, a redundancy to the grid, a means of freeing up the baseload power that we all need in times of crisis. And it's important to know about Bitcoin mining. They don't actually make the money nowadays, because it's so big and competitive, from mining the coins. They mine it as part of pools. And so they aggregate their processing power, and they're paid based on the amount of processing power they direct towards the pool. So they don't actually get the Bitcoin. They're rewarded because the pool itself, the miners in, it can be China and the US and Canada, they aggregate the direction of their power, and the pool gets the block of coin, and then they share the proceeds that way. So they hedge themselves. They may not get the full block and the full value, but they'll get a portion of it because they expended enough energy to actually get it. And so the reason why that's important is because that means that Bitcoin can power down in times of critical need. The argument can be made that, well, yeah, Bitcoin just drives up the base, the total demand, and that's true. Bitcoin mining on the grid does mean that you're using more power in good times. Okay, but at least you would have that baseload power built out to get back to the grid when there's an emergency. So I think it kind of cuts both ways. And Bitcoin's power gets scrutinized, like I said, because it's highly visible. I included a link there. You can click on that highlighted link right there, and you can actually see how much hash power is being directed towards a Bitcoin network in real time. And then you can kind of calculate, well, if the average price is between 2 and 7 cents a kilowatt, you can actually quantify how much money is being spent to mine that Bitcoin. And by the White House's own estimates, the whole Bitcoin network only uses at any one time 13 gigawatts to 25 gigawatts. Now, 1 megawatt, which is much smaller than a gigawatt, by a fold of 1,000. 1 megawatt of power powers about 250 homes. 250 megawatts of power is about as much power as the city of Lubbock uses. A lot of the Bitcoin operations here in Texas are between 50 megawatts and 250 megawatts. The largest is 1 gigawatt. The whole network globally between 13 and 25 gigawatts. As I mentioned earlier, as much as some countries. Well, what other energy uses also use as much as some countries? Your clothes dryers. Is clothes drying a critical need that you absolutely must have? My wife would say yes. I grew up in a household where we hung our clothes out to dry. So, you can actually find a way not to use that energy if global warming and emissions is your number one concern. I'm not saying we're going to do it, just saying it's possible. Facebook, charging your phone. Some natural gas-fired power plant somewhere, unless you have solar panels, more than likely, you use to charge your phone, and you use it for hours and hours to scroll through, essentially just wasting time. But that's still an energy use and an energy consumption. And if you aggregate all those phones and everything else, I can assure you that's going to be globally more than Bitcoin, has ever used in its history. Christmas lights. Oh yeah, we all love the Christmas lights. Christmas lights, at least last I checked, have used more power in 1 year than the Bitcoin network has used, in its whole existence. So it's all about what you can see and how we use our power versus what you can't see. Bitcoin is invisible, which is why it gets scrutiny, but there are issues and concerns with it. I do want to show you kind of where all the mining power is. This is hard to see, but the dark blue is the US. China used to have the most. China's still light blue, and then you have Canada, Russia, Germany, and we can see basically more or less where all that hash power is coming from by country. But the US is currently the leader, and I think that's good because you don't want too much Bitcoin in one place for reasons I'll also get to, because it can hurt the security of the network if the US or China decides they want to ban Bitcoin mining. But one distinction I think it's critical to make is energy use versus emissions. And you're going to hear people, for the rest of our lives decrying the energy use. What people really care about because of global warming are emissions. If Bitcoin was powered using all wind or all solar, there are no emissions, so the energy use doesn't really matter. We do know that we're going to need vastly more energy in the future than we're using now. And what we need to mitigate are the emissions. Now, the blessing and the curse of Bitcoin is how much energy it's using, but you can also tell that generally speaking, it's also trying to use more renewable energy. It doesn't care, it just wants the cheapest energy. So it's located in West Texas. And I think that's a positive thing because that makes that industry cleaner, and it's already cleaner than most large scale industries. But in the aggregate, when you use Christmas lights, use all these things, Bitcoin globally only uses about 0.5%, half of 1% of total global energy use, compared to landfills. Landfills in the US, that's responsible for 15% of total methane releases. We capture that methane to a point, but that's a much larger source of emissions than Bitcoin ever will be. So I think it's important to think about the emissions versus the energy use. As long as it's being used more cleanly and efficiently, that's a great thing. We're still trying to get to the point where we can capture those emissions. We're not there yet, but everything's a process. And Bitcoin can locate anywhere. So like I said, they're going to West Texas, they're going to the oil patch, they're modular, they can hook up the machines in large steel boxes, and they can mine the Bitcoin, and when there's no more power or natural gas to use, they can move somewhere else. But if you burn methane and convert it into CO2, that's still a huge savings because methane is 86 times more greenhouse gas intensive than CO2. So obviously we want to get rid of as much as we can, but it's better to have CO2 in the air versus methane because it just captures more heat on the planet. So this is just for comparison, gold energy use, Bitcoin energy use, the banking system. How much energy does our banking system use? I want to make sure I'm on time, and I think we're doing okay. Business trips, servers, planes for all kinds of, global meetings, things like that. We can't quantify how much energy the banking system uses. We know that it does. We just can't see it as clearly as we do banking. We know that it costs, fossil fuels and labor to dig gold out of the ground. It's global, so some of it's slave labor, some of it's all kinds of stuff. How much energy does that use? So it's really compared to what? You have to know how to contextualize Bitcoin's energy use to really understand why or if it matters. California, as I just mentioned, this is where all of their emissions come from. 41% of that is transportation, 24% industrial. Bitcoin's not on there, and it never will be. But people like to talk about how much energy it uses, and again, it is a lot. It is a lot. I'm not by any stretch saying that it does not use an insignificant amount of energy. It does, but globally, and if limiting emissions are the goal, there's much lower hanging fruit that will get us a lot further towards having a planet that's not heating and creating these horrific hurricanes that we're experiencing. Methane mitigation. Oh, this is hard to read. You guys can look at this. This is less important, but just showing you how Bitcoin mining checks all the boxes compared to other uses in terms of methane mitigation. So Bitcoin mining can be a problem when it comes to energy use. And we're experiencing that in Texas because if you have these miners that are mobile, they can set up in Austin today, and then in 3 months they can go set up in Lubbock. ERCOT and the Public Utility Commission, they have to plan for the demand. And most times when you build a city, that city's not going anywhere. It's just going to grow. You can kind of scale out how much it's going to grow over time. With a Bitcoin, you can have 250 megawatts here, this month, and 6 months from now, it can be elsewhere. That's a challenge. That's a problem. You can't have, facilities the size of Lubbock's power demand just come on and offline without serious investment and planning. And so that's what, Texas is facing, and they're trying to accommodate it because of our cheap energy and regulatory environment. Bitcoin miners are flocking to Texas, and the current Texas government is embracing it compared to other states. So we're going to need more power for Bitcoin mining and for our growing state over time, and that's indisputable. Indisputable. Everybody knows that's the deal, and we also have to account for the Winter Storm Uris and everything else. One thing that matters for wind and solar that we're starting to see is renewables are not always reliable. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And in fact, with wind, a lot of that wind comes at night when we're all sleeping. So the power demand in large demand centers, load centers, don't need it. But that's wasted opportunity for the wind producers that have economics. And if their turbines are turning, there's zero cost energy and things like that. If they hook up Bitcoin miners that power off during the day and use that power at night, they can actually monetize those renewables if Bitcoin plays out the way we think that it has the potential to. So that's why I think that there's a real opportunity to actually use Bitcoin mining to help pay for the wind and solar generation we're going to need until more mature battery technology comes along and we can store that, that wind energy from the nighttime and use it during the day. Right now in Texas, there's 1.2 gigawatts of mining power consumption. It's expected to double in the next 12 to 18 months. ERCOT has formed what's called the Large Flexible Load Task Force. I'm very actively involved with that. And that is just trying to figure out what we're going to do to accommodate this load and how we're going to need it to communicate and behave, what rules of the road we're going to set. And because Bitcoin uses the cheapest power, the reality is if there's another Winter Storm Uri, it's going to power down. Because for Uri, it went up to $9,000 a megawatt hour for, at that time, and Bitcoin miners can't profit at that level unless Bitcoin is, $2 million or something ridiculous, which it's not. So the other issue is transmission. Even though there's all this wind and solar in Texas, there's not the transmission lines available to get it to Dallas and Austin and Houston and places where it's needed. And that's another issue that has to be solved, meaning that for the time being, Bitcoin can be by the wind and solar, and you don't worry about it actually taking the renewables if it's managed the right way. So the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT, their chief concern right now is reliability, meaning next time there's a huge heat wave or a cold snap, that the grid is there and there's not the issues that we had. So what have we seen from Bitcoin miners? Well, let's look at 2022 so far. They powered down when it got cold and they allowed that power to go back on the grid. This summer, when it was really hot, as we all know, they powered down and they made that electricity available. Now, some miners did get paid for that. Some miners actually made more money powering down to provide that power back to the grid than they actually made mining Bitcoin. And that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And I understand that completely. But that is something that is available to many large scale energy users, not just Bitcoin. So something that others are doing, you're just not aware of it. Again, because Bitcoin's the bright, shiny object getting the attention. Question.
Who paid them to shut it down?
Well, the ERCOT market did, so we all did. But we would have done that to a steel plant or large industrial users too, because we needed
the taxpayer.
That's right. We needed that power, and that's a service that they sign up for. But they agree to pay for that power over a long period of time, so they're committed to buy it. They just get paid more when they don't use it as a service to the overall grid. So we'd be paying somebody for it, even if it wasn't the Bitcoin miners.
That was really what taxpayers is really utility customers.
That's right. I mean, I guess I should have been more clear, but yes, it's the consumers of energy that pay for your electrical service that pay for it. It's not really a direct tax, you know, the way another service would go. Correct. They're probably more or less the same people. There is some concern because right now there's 33 gigawatts of expected Bitcoin mining in the queue that wants to be up and running by 2027. Now, that's always true that a lot of people have plans to get connected to the grid. Not all of them come to fruition. There's not enough ASICs on the planet in that time frame to service 33 gigawatts of Bitcoin mining. To give you an idea, the total Texas grid is like between 80 and 90 gigawatts of total consumption for the whole state. So the 33 gigawatts of just Bitcoin mining is huge. Best estimates are that it's going to be between 3 and 5 over the next 2 years or so. A lot of those projects will fail, especially with the downturn. But you also have to remember that Bitcoin mining itself is becoming more efficient. When you have players like Intel making more efficient chips, like anything else, it's going to use less power. Your phones today last 24 hours. 10 years ago they lasted 5. That's going to happen in this industry like any other. So the efficiency is coming, and we hope it comes soon. But there was an article in 2017 that said that Bitcoin will use all the world's power by 2020. Well, that didn't happen. So there's a lot of stuff out there that just misinformation, because most people don't work in the energy industry. It's like 3% of the country actually works in energy, 2% works in agriculture, 1.5% is in the military. So more and more, all the essential services that we all need is being maintained by fewer and fewer of most of the people, and so it's hard to get that understanding across those various industries that we all 100% depend on. So I think I already covered those points. I've always said that we should work to make sure that Bitcoin mining and every use of energy is clean. There's ways to do that. I've published articles on it that you can find and read, and I'm glad to talk to anybody here about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and its many applications that are going to impact us for the rest of our lives. But just wanted to close with some pictures. These are mining operations in the oil patch that are capturing spare methane. They're starting to use old hydro plants, repurposing them to power Bitcoin miners. And there's environmental issues associated with them, but at least that's a use that can be monetized and be used to grow a whole new industry in places where when it used to be used for steel or whatever it was, people can work in these Bitcoin miners and keep them maintained, so it has a chance to revolutionize areas that are more depressed at this time. Wind and solar, they're looking at it to monetize their operation. Geothermal, that's a constant source of energy that is not always needed, that can also be used by Bitcoin miners for the stranded energy. And I think over the long term, in 15, 20 years, I think because it's going to be bigger and bigger and more concentrated, you're going to see utilities themselves, once they can show that it's a value add to the ratepayers, start to attach Bitcoin miners to their stranded base load power that isn't always being used, switch it off when it is, and also be able to monetize that, and the network will flourish. And just like we used to only have the cash register, now we have the iPads to pay. I think we'll be paying for Bitcoin in the future once it's more well integrated. So just to conclude, Bitcoin can be good and bad for the environment. We still don't know what it's going to be, but we know what it has the potential to be. Bitcoin mining is trending towards renewables. It's anywhere from 40 to 60% utilizing renewables already because it wants the cheap power. You can't build a renewable-based electric grid with intermittent resources without flexible demands or loads like Bitcoin mining. They really dovetail and are symbiotic. And miners buy the cheapest energy, and they're also there when nobody wants to buy the energy. So they're the buyers of first and last resort, meaning that the economics of maintaining the grid from whatever energy source always has a purchaser for that energy. And that has never happened before Bitcoin mining was available. There are regulatory challenges. The Biden administration across all the federal agencies has requested basically a white paper for how they think they can adjust and adapt to cryptocurrency and blockchain. Those are coming out now. lawyers like me and the team we have, Hush Blackwell, are all looking at that and trying to figure out where we need to be to help our clients position for the future and navigate the present. So it's going to be an ongoing challenge, and we're glad to help any of you all with that going forward as questions come up. And with the 2 minutes I have left, I'll take any questions. And I'll also stay after to talk with you all, because I know that some people just want to come and visit, which is completely fine. But thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate the chance to talk to you all.
Are you an expert witness on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
I have not yet had that pleasure, and I think the challenges to that are going to be I'm not a programmer. I have trained myself in, as many aspects of the space as I can, including Solidity, which is the programming language that is used for the Ethereum network and some of the other layer 2 blockchains, but I don't have any formal training in it. And it's very rare to find people that actually have that. We're still kind of figuring it out. I am blockchain certified at Berkeley. I just did that like 2 months ago. And that was okay, but I didn't really feel like I learned that much. It's just still an evolving space, but there are certificate programs. MIT has a good one. Berkeley has a great one. Every university is gonna have them. So I think expert witnesses are going to be an amalgam of various disciplines, and I haven't done that, but that's just the way I view the space. You got to know probably 10 different things, and I only know like 3 of those areas really well. So it's pretty challenging, I think, to actually be a true blockchain expert, given all the various disciplines that go into the space. Yes, ma'am.
The white papers you published, are they on your website or?
Yes, they should be on the firm's website. I have a place called Publications. If you want some other publications, I can send them to you as well. There's a lot of good materials out there. There's also a lot of really terrible materials out there. So it's really important that you know how to discern them, and it's pretty hard. Yes.
Do you mine? And if so, what do you mine?
I do mine. I only mine Bitcoin. And right now, just so you know, 6 months ago, one Bitcoin miner was between $10,000 and $13,000. I just got an email saying that you can buy miners for about $2,600. Now you still have to pay hosting fees and electricity fees, but you can sign up for these services. When I think every miner that I had when prices were higher was earning about between $600 and $800 worth of Bitcoin a month. So you can actually generate a fair amount of revenue doing it. And now would probably be the time to think about looking at the prices and the hosting capability. To buy your machines, have somebody else host them. They'll send you your Bitcoin every month when they close it out, and you can make a fair amount of money doing it. Yes.
So we've been talking about Bitcoin, and it's obviously the big player in that space. But in terms of mining other cryptocurrencies, how much do you see them impacting these numbers and the logistics that you're talking about?
I mean, I think there's going to be people that are going to try to have proof of work blockchains. The way the miners are set up now, you can't mine Ethereum with a Bitcoin miner or any other things. I have a client that's looking at setting up their own layer 1 with their own specific miner. Whether that works, I'm not really sure, but there are people that are going to try. My personal view, and it's going to be unpopular in the industry, is I think there's only room for one proof of work blockchain at the size and scale that Bitcoin is. If you can do it smaller and whatever the case might be, then fine, but it is a significant energy, so you can't have a bunch of competing proof of work blockchains for the energy purposes. In my opinion, there might be a better proof of work blockchain, in which case great, or maybe we'll really realize that proof of stake is more secure long term. We just don't know. It's only 14 years old. It's still, it's barely a teenager. It's still trying to decide what it's going to be, and we're going to help, decide that. But that's just my take on it. Yes, sir.
When like a miner tries to secure contract for energy, do they contract individually with like power companies like Cost Energy, or do they like form blocks to contract?
There's various configurations. You can sign up to, every utility has to serve you if they're regulated. So if I say I want 250 megawatts of power, the utility has to try and figure it out. There's going to be costs to the miner associated with that. That can be in the millions of dollars, but if you're willing to pay that, They have to figure out a way to get you that power, without, unless there's some exceptions. You do have some miners that are setting up their own wind and solar facilities, and they're using that. But again, those sources are intermittent, so they have to also connect to the grid. So they have to negotiate something most of the time with the utility, depending on where they're located. So it's a brave new world, and everybody's trying to figure it out. All right, well, I will stick around. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
All right, great presentation, thank you. I still feel like it would be easier to understand rocket science